Good morning. It is that time of year here in Des Moines Public Schools where we need to talk about and share publicly our school budget for fiscal year 2026. As always, the board, myself, and our Chief Financial Officer take very seriously our fiduciary responsibility to ensure that we are looking at a budget for the upcoming fiscal year that is anchored in some key desires and outcomes. One, resource allocation and appropriate resource allocation as necessary in order for us to achieve our goals and guardrails. The second is our budget should be tightly aligned to our commitment around providing every single student who knocks on our doors with a quality education, ensuring that we have the appropriate staffing levels in all of our buildings, including school and non-instructional buildings, prioritizing the appropriate facility maintenance to ensure that our facilities are up to par. Certainly ensuring compliance and accountability with state law and state code. And equally as important is thinking about how do we continue to build community trust by providing visibility into our budgetary practices. I will punt it to our Chief Financial Officer, Shashank Aurora, who will present.
Good morning, Dr. Roberts, and good morning, community. Thank you, Dr. Roberts. Our hope and plan today is to simplify the finance budget for Des Moines Public School. What we plan to cover is the agenda is the school budget basics, the revenue, where we get the money from, expenditure, where we spend, what are the key measures for general fund, certifying the budget, and the final thoughts. So on school budget basics, basically what I want to highlight over here is what are the funding sources that we have for the district? Where does the money go and where can we use the money? So to highlight, and I'll pick up a few items. I don't want to delve into each and every item because it's a fairly complex diagram, as you can say. So let's pick up a simple one, which is the property tax levies, which all of us are impacted with. And if you see at the property tax levies, the dark blue line shows that the money is going to the operating fund, which is the biggest fund that we have, the general fund. The green shows it's going towards the management fund. And the management fund is used to pay for our property and casualty insurance, any early retirement schemes, workman's compensation, and those kind of items. The gray line shows it goes to the special revenue funds, which are the PEPL, both voted as well as approved by the board. The light blue goes towards the PEARL. And as some of you may know, the DMPS or Des Moines Public School is one of the few districts in the state of Iowa which still has PEARL. So let's talk about general fund, which is the largest fund for our district. The uses of funds, as you would see, is largely to pay the salary for the staff, the utility, the books, the equipments, all those kinds of things. So as you would see that the school finance is not simple, it's quite siloed, and the uses of the funds is dependent on what the funding source is and what fund account is generating that. So how is the district structured? Operating fund, as I mentioned, is the general fund, largest fund. Then we have the special revenue funds, the management fund, which I mentioned, what the uses for that is. PEPL is used to purchase technology, the buses for the students, repair and maintenance for the building. PEARL is for playgrounds. Then we have the student activity where we fund the activities that happen both during and after school hours. Then we have the capital project fund, which is the SAVE, which is a statewide penny. This is the 1 cent that every time we purchase something goes towards it and is distributed equally amongst the students in the state of Iowa. Then we have the debt service fund, or which is also called the GEO bonds, which are issued through that. And the district does not have any debt service fund so far. The second large bucket happens to be proprietary funds, which are largely divided into enterprise funds and internal service funds. Enterprise funds work pretty much like the P&L of an enterprise or a private corporation. And the funds which fall under this are the food and nutrition, childcare, home building, the auto body, and ag store. These funds have to generate enough revenue to pay for their expenses. They cannot run a deficit. The internal service funds are funds which provide services to other departments within the organization, like the self-insurance or the print shop, which prints for the whole district, and then we charge them a revenue, and it self-supports itself. And then we have the fiduciary funds, and as some of you may know, that we are the only district in the state of Iowa, or only public sector in the state of Iowa, which has its own pension fund, which is the Des Moines Teachers Pension Fund. So can the school district spend money on anything that they want? No. The funding in Iowa is extremely siloed, and the funds that we receive can be spent only on those allowed expenses. It need not be the one expenses that are the highest priority for the district. Both state and federal law dictates what are those expenses, even for general fund. The other thing I would like to highlight is that we cannot move funds from one fund to another. To give an example, if food and nutrition is generating a surplus, we cannot move those funds to the general funds. If we do decide to move something, that requires a prior board approval. Where do the revenues come from? These are the 5 largest sources: the state aid, the local funds, which includes the property taxes, sales tax, federal funds, and program fees. The federal funds, as some of you may know, is creating a lot of noise at the national level because they are being evaluated as to how much they would be given, what would be given. There's a lot of moving parts, which will have more clarity sometime, hopefully by the month of May, June. How is state funding decided? State funding is divided into 3 different categories. The regular program, which is basically dependent on the number of students that we have. And that is multiplied by this supplemental state aid, which is decided year by year by the legislators. And as some of you may know, that this year 2% has been approved. We'll talk more about supplemental state aid at a later stage. Then we have categorical fundings, which is again per student funding, but only for certain categories of expenses. To give an example, the dropout prevention. The money that we get from dropout prevention can only be used for that purpose. Similar thing for gifted and talented. The third category that we have is the weighted programs. Here, besides getting the regular weightage for every student, an additional weightage is given, especially for students who are under ELL or under special education or under an IEP. What is the district's annual revenue? As you would see, the general fund is the single largest fund for the district, and 78% of the funding comes from there, which is almost $473 million. The other funds which are there are special revenue and capital projects. Both of them are approximately the same funding, 7%. Then we have the debt service. The debt service over here, I may highlight, is not the property tax debt service, but this is the revenue bonds where the funding of that comes from the SAVE funds. And then we have the enterprise. What are the sources? I think it should not come as a surprise. The largest source is the state source, 63%. Or $296 million. Then we have local sources, which is 30%. The Fed is 7%, and various transfers, which is under 1%. How are property taxes set? Here, what I would like to highlight is there is a misnomer that the school districts can largely influence the amount of property taxes. The only property taxes that we can really influence is the management levy and the cash reserve levy, which we do not charge. The general fund levy is calculated based on a rate or a formula set by the state. And the management fund is certified annually by the board. The PEPL, the debt service, which we don't have, and PEARL are not usually adjusted annually but are set by a rate. What has been the district tax rate for the last few years? As you would see, the tax rate for the Des Moines residents have been coming down gradually. And this year's tax rate is very similar to what it was last year, which is 14.68. Where do we spend the money? As it may not come as a surprise, the largest source, the place that we spend the money is the general fund, which is around 79% of $500+ million. And the others are as shown in the slide. How did the district spend the general fund dollars? Majority, as you would see, 83% is towards the salaries and benefits for the staff. The rest are on purchased services, which is 10%, and then there are small buckets all spread all across. Where do we spend the money? Again, this should not come as a surprise. The money is largely spent on instruction, instructional support, and school administration, and that accounts for 80+% of the total expenses. As you would see, the general and administrative expenses are fairly small. What are the key measures for the general funds? These are the two things that we always keep on top of the mind when we are doing our budget. One is the spending authority, also called as the unspent budget authority, or the solvency ratio. I would try to explain the spending authority a little bit more in details because that is the one which really impacts our general fund. So something to understand is spending is limited by the amount of spending authority a district has. A simple example would be you may have $20,000 in your bank account, but your credit card limit is $10,000. You can spend only $10,000. So as you would know, it's not the amount of cash or fund balance that is considered to calculate the spending authority. And the two concepts that we typically talk about is the fund balance and the spending authority. And all the restrictions, or majority of the restrictions, apply to general fund. I would explain a little bit more about spending authority. So how is spending authority actually calculated? It's a math of number of students that the district has. And as I will share later on, there has been a steady decline in the number of students for the Des Moines Public School, except for the last 2 years, where there has been a gradual increase, times the cost per pupil, which is decided by the state, which equates to the current year spending authority. When we talk about the total spending authority, it is not just the spending authority for the year, but also if there has been any surplus of spending authority from previous years. We look at the total spending authority. The other thing I would like to point out is the student count is always a year behind. It is not for the same year. And spending authority is funded by both property tax levies and state aid. So what are the ways to increase our spending authority? Increase enrollment or increase in supplemental state aid. The supplemental state aid is decided by the state. And this year, as I had mentioned, is 2 years. And then the third category is the increase in miscellaneous income. And in the current interest rate environment, that has helped the district to some extent. I think this is an important slide for us to understand. Our supplemental state aid for the last 10 years has been on a decline. It is 2.11%. With the decade before that, or 20 years before that, 1995 to 2015, the average was 2.91, and prior to that was almost 6.22. As we can all well understand, in the current inflation environment, getting an increase of 2% the way we are getting, or 2.11 for the last decade, really leads us to this challenging environment of budget cuts. This does not even meet inflation, and it's very difficult to retain staff if you're going to give the increase in salary at the rate at which we get the supplemental state aid. As I had mentioned, the spending authority that we get is dependent on the students. From a peak of 33,000 students in 2018-19, today we are at 30,800 students. The last 2 years, we've seen a tick, but from 19 to till 2 years back, as you would see, there has been a significant decline in our enrollment. And COVID or the pandemic years were the years when we lost the most number of students. This is a slide which shows how many students we have lost in 2018-19 till 24-25, 2,222 students, which actually equates to a large school or 3 middle schools or 6 elementary schools. So as you would see, this is a significant drop. And this is one of the things which is causing us to launch the project around 15 to 18 months back, which is called the Reimagine Education. So what are the requirements for budget adoption and certification? The most important thing is your current year's annual budget cannot exceed the current spending authority and any carryover spending authority. This is extremely critical because if it does, then Dr. Roberts and myself have to go to the school board, to the state, and explain and have a plan as to what is it that we need to do so that it's no longer a negative spending authority. We definitely don't want to do that, so we've always tried to keep it in the positive over there. The budget has to be balanced. That means the revenue plus fund balance should be equal to or greater than the annual budget. And the property tax rate must be set. So what are the FY26 budget estimates? The increase in our budget costs for this year we are anticipating approximately $17 million of increase. Majority of that is coming through the salary increase and health benefits increase for our staff. I would say probably 80-85%. And since the state supplemental aid is minimal, the way we are trying to bridge the gap is the supplemental aid, which will provide us $5.1 million, and using the previous fund balance or the unspent spending authority that we had built over a period of time. Using that previous reserves or unspent spending authority is how we will be balancing our budget. The board had set a target of 15%. We are at 17%, so we're still extremely healthy, not a cause for concern. This is something which we'll continue evaluating year after year with the board to see whether we can continue using the unspent spending authority or reduce expenses or do a combination of both. This slide shows very clearly what the property tax rates has been for our district in the last 10 to 11 years. We were at a peak of 18.61 in 2021, and we have gradually increased it down to 14.68. Even in 15, we were close to 18 plus. This is what we had published in the newspaper, which basically shows what is our proposed budget. As you would see, the total resources, and I would like to highlight this is not general fund, this is all funds, which includes SAVE, PEPL, enterprise funds, everything. So this looks a little bit higher, but this is what we have to publish and we have to send to the state. So our total resources are around $633 million, and our beginning balance was 270, which makes the resources as $904 million. The large buckets that we have over here are instruction, support services, non-instructional programs, other expenditures, and the transfers out. Transfers out is basically the money which we are receiving in our sales tax or SAVE, which is transferred to pay the revenue bonds, which I had mentioned earlier. And then we have the ending balance, which is $231 million. So final thoughts, things that we need to remember. Districts cannot use the funds for anything it chooses. General fund is the least restrictive fund. Compensation is the largest expense in the general fund. It's also the largest expenditure category of all funds. And enrollment and spending authority is the one that drives the budget. And most revenue sources are outside the district's control. I would also like to say that this budget would be posted online. We are going to provide an opportunity to staff, students, community, if they have any questions, that they can send it to budget@dmschools.org. Till Sunday, which is April 20th, we will look into the questions received and we will post a response on our web portal before the budget hearing, which is on April 22nd. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Roberts.
Thank you, Shashank. Thank you all. We remain committed to ensuring that as we think about our decisions with regards to not only fiscal responsibility, but more importantly, budget and resource reallocation, we are going to prioritize whether or not we are making those decisions that truly meets the needs of all of our students and ensuring that the 3 goals set by the board, the 5 guardrails, and our strategic plan goals and objectives are met. They're met through adequate funding and prudent resource reallocation. Shashank, thank you so much for sharing the budget around fiscal year 2026 with our community today.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts, and thank you, community.